Two nations, one destiny. That was the question in 1947 when India and Pakistan were carved out from the British Raj. Both countries started with seemingly similar economic challenges: mass migration, infrastructure destruction, and political upheaval. But fast forward 75 years, and the story is shockingly different. One is an emerging economic superpower, while the other struggles with debt, instability, and underdevelopment. How did this happen? How did India, despite starting with so many handicaps, manage to leapfrog over Pakistan to become one of the fastest growing economies in the world?
Pakistan's year-on-year inflation hit a record level of 36.5%.
Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif made a last-ditch effort to get a much-needed loan from the IMF.
Pakistan borrowed this money domestically at exorbitant interest rates.
Today, we dive deep into the untold story of how India and Pakistan's economies diverged so drastically. We'll explore the pivotal reforms, key decisions, geopolitical strategies, and even blunders that shaped the destinies of these two nations. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a case study on economic planning, governance, and the power of strategic vision. Get ready for a journey that's as controversial as it is revealing. The year was 1947. The British Empire finally left the Indian subcontinent, leaving behind two newly minted nations, India and Pakistan. But these two countries, born out of the same colonial past, were not left with equal assets. India, despite facing the daunting task of rehabilitating nearly 14 million refugees and coping with the violent aftermath of partition, inherited a relatively diverse economic base. It had major industrial cities like Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras, which were centers for textiles, jute, steel, and other industries. It also had more developed railways, road networks, and ports. Pakistan, on the other hand, was left with a largely agrarian economy. Apart from Karachi, which served as a small port city, Pakistan had very little industrial infrastructure. The country's economy was primarily dependent on agriculture, especially on the export of raw materials like jute and cotton. But here's the twist. Despite these initial disadvantages, by the 1950s and 60s, Pakistan was actually doing better than India economically. During this period, Pakistan's economy grew at an average rate of 6% per year, compared to India's sluggish 3 to 4%. Karachi emerged as a vibrant financial hub, attracting foreign investors, while the cities of Lahore and Dhaka, then part of East Pakistan, began to develop. The reasons were straightforward. Pakistan, under Ayub Khan's military regime, implemented policies that promoted industrialization and export-led growth. It attracted foreign aid and investment, especially from the United States, which was keen on maintaining its influence in South Asia during the Cold War era. Moreover, the Green Revolution in the 1960s significantly boosted agricultural productivity. So how did things start to go wrong for Pakistan, and why couldn't it maintain its early economic momentum? The answer lies in the stark difference in political stability between the two countries. Pakistan's early economic advantage began to unravel due to a series of military coups, starting with Ayub Khan in 1958. Each subsequent regime, Yahya Khan, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, Ziaul Haq, and later Pervez Musharraf, brought with it shifts in economic policy, often leading to periods of uncertainty and stagnation. While Ayub Khan's regime saw economic growth, it also increased economic disparities, leading to political unrest. His downfall in 1969 marked the beginning of a long series of political crises, culminating in the secession of East Pakistan in 1971, which became Bangladesh. This was a major blow, not just politically but economically. Pakistan lost over half its population and a significant share of its natural resources and industrial base. In contrast, India, while not free from its own political crises, maintained a democratic process. The famous emergency from 1975 to 1977 imposed by Indira Gandhi was indeed a dark chapter. The emergency was a controversial period in Indian history that lasted from 1975 to 1977, when Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, facing growing political opposition and allegations of electoral malpractice, declared a state of emergency across the country. This gave her government sweeping powers, suspended civil liberties, and censored the press. Political opponents were jailed, dissent was crushed, and democratic institutions were undermined, leading to widespread fear and discontent. While the government justified the emergency as a means to restore order and implement reforms, many saw it as an assault on democracy and a move to consolidate personal power. The period ended in 1977 when Indira Gandhi called for elections. which resulted in a resounding defeat for her party, signaling a strong public rejection of authoritarian rule. But India returned to democratic norms quickly after. The relative continuity in governance allowed for the development of robust institutions like the Reserve Bank of India, RBI, the Planning Commission, and later Niti Aayog, which provided a stable economic framework. During this period, India pursued a mixed economy model, balancing state intervention with private sector growth. The focus was on self-reliance, building heavy industries, scientific research institutions, and public sector enterprises. This license Raj system, however, did slow growth due to its bureaucratic red tape. The license Raj was a system of excessive regulation and control that governed India's economy from the 1950s until the early 1990s. After gaining independence, India's leaders believed that a tightly regulated economy was necessary to ensure equitable growth and prevent exploitation by private capital. This resulted in a complex web of licenses, permits, and approvals that businesses had to navigate for almost every economic activity, from setting up a factory to producing goods, importing raw materials, or expanding operations. This bureaucratic system, dominated by red tape and government control, stifled entrepreneurship, discouraged competition, and gave rise to widespread corruption. It forced businesses to spend more time and resources dealing with paperwork and bribery than on innovation or growth, resulting in economic inefficiency and low-quality goods for consumers. The license Raj not only slowed India's economic growth but also created chronic shortages of goods, limited consumer choices, and kept India isolated from the global economy. The government's tight control over industrial production and foreign trade meant that the private sector was underdeveloped, and industries were often shielded from global competition. It wasn't until the economic crisis of 1991 that the license Raj came to an end with sweeping reforms that opened up India's economy to the world, reduced import restrictions, and removed many of the licenses that had previously governed industrial production. This marked the beginning of India's journey toward becoming a global economic powerhouse, demonstrating the transformative power of economic liberalization and market-oriented policies. The economic story takes a pivotal turn in 1991. By this time, both India and Pakistan were struggling with low growth rates, high inflation, and a lack of foreign exchange reserves. However, India faced a severe balance of payments crisis. With only 2 weeks' worth of foreign exchange reserves left, India had to mortgage its gold reserves to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, to secure a bailout. Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, in a bold and unprecedented move, they dismantled the license Raj, reduced tariffs, opened up the economy to foreign investment, and devalued the rupee to boost exports. This marked the beginning of India's economic liberalization. The impact was profound. India's GDP growth rate, which had hovered around 3 to 4% for decades, shot up to 6 to 7% in the 1990s. Foreign direct investment, FDI, poured in, and sectors like IT, telecommunications, and pharmaceuticals saw exponential growth. Indian conglomerates like Infosys, Tata, and Reliance began to emerge on the global stage. Pakistan, meanwhile, did not undertake such sweeping reforms. Political instability, frequent changes in government, and a failure to address structural issues like land reforms, industrial policy, and export diversification left Pakistan lagging behind. While there were periods of growth under military rulers like Zia-ul-Haq in the 1980s and Musharraf in the early 2000s, these were often short-lived and heavily dependent on foreign aid rather than sustainable, broad-based economic development. The contrast couldn't be more stark. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, India was rapidly integrating into the global economy, while Pakistan was struggling with a high debt-to-GDP ratio, low investment rates, and chronic energy shortages. Let's dive deeper into another critical factor: geopolitics. Both India and Pakistan have had contentious relations since 1947, leading to several wars and continuous military tensions. But how did these conflicts affect their economies differently? Pakistan's focus on maintaining a competitive military edge, rooted in the perceived existential threat from India, led to disproportionately high defense spending. At various points, defense expenditure consumed nearly 30 to 40% of Pakistan's federal budget. This diverted critical resources away from social sectors like education, health, and infrastructure development. In contrast, while India also maintained a strong defense posture, it balanced its budget to accommodate broader developmental goals. India's investment in education and healthcare, alongside a steady increase in infrastructure development, paid off over time, leading to a more balanced and diversified economic base. Moreover, while Pakistan heavily relied on foreign aid, primarily from the US, especially during the Cold War and later during the War on Terror, this aid came with strings attached and often led to economic distortions. In contrast, India pursued a more diversified approach, focusing on trade, remittances, and foreign direct investment, allowing for greater economic autonomy. One of the most decisive factors in India's economic leap was its investment in human capital. The establishment of the Indian Institutes of Technology, IITs, and the Indian Institutes of Management, IIMs, in the 1950s and 1960s was not an accident. These institutions laid the groundwork for a highly skilled workforce that would eventually lead the country's IT and services boom in the 1990s and beyond. On the other hand, Pakistan's educational system suffered due to underinvestment and the lack of emphasis on higher education and technical skills. While there are excellent institutions like Lahore University of Management Sciences, LUMS, and Aga Khan University, they are few and far between compared to India's massive network of public and private institutions. This gap has resulted in a shortage of skilled labor, impeding Pakistan's potential to capitalize on the knowledge economy. The demographic dividend, where a country's working age population is larger than the dependent population, has been a significant growth engine for India. Now, with a burgeoning middle class, increased consumption, and a young, dynamic workforce, India has positioned itself as a global service and tech hub. In contrast, Pakistan's youth bulge has not translated into economic gains. High unemployment rates among educated youth, coupled with inadequate vocational training, have created social challenges instead. Today, India and Pakistan stand at very different economic crossroads. India, now one of the world's largest economies, continues to push forward with structural reforms, digitization, and a greater focus on sustainability and innovation. It's not without its challenges, income inequality, corruption, and regional disparities, but the trajectory is clear. Pakistan, meanwhile, faces a more precarious path. With debt hovering around 100% of its GDP, limited foreign reserves, and political instability, the country must make hard choices. It needs bold reforms, reducing military expenditure, focusing on export diversification, empowering women in the workforce, and embracing economic globalization. Both countries have untapped potential. Pakistan's geographic position, its young population, and its agricultural base could be leveraged for a turnaround, but it requires vision, planning, and above all, consistency. As entrepreneurs and future leaders, what lessons can we learn from the economies of India and Pakistan? First of all, consistent policy and governance matter. One of the most crucial lessons from the economic journeys of India and Pakistan is the importance of consistent policy and governance. Economic growth thrives on stability. When a country or a business has consistent policies and a stable governance structure, it creates an environment where long-term planning, investment, and development can flourish. India benefited from this kind of stability post-1991, while Pakistan's frequent political changes created uncertainty that scared off long-term investment. Secondly, investing in human capital is investing in the future. Another key takeaway is the undeniable value of investing in human capital. This means prioritizing education, healthcare, and skill development. India's rise as a global tech hub was no accident. It was the result of decades of investment in institutions like the IITs and IIMs. On the other hand, Pakistan's underinvestment in education, particularly in technical and vocational training, has held back its economic potential. The lesson is clear. Whether for a country or a company, investing in people is investing in the future. Thirdly, diversification and sustainable growth are essential. Next, we learn the importance of diversification and sustainable growth. Relying too heavily on one sector, like Pakistan did with agriculture and textiles, or depending on foreign aid, is not a sustainable economic strategy. India's approach of building a diversified economy, ranging from IT and pharmaceuticals to manufacturing, has made it more resilient to global economic shocks. Diversification, whether in a nation's economy or a business portfolio, is key to managing risks and ensuring steady growth. Embrace globalization and technology. Finally, embracing globalization and technological advancement has been a game changer. The countries and companies that open up to the world, adapt to technological shifts, and encourage innovation are the ones that thrive. India's success in integrating into the global economy and becoming a hub for digital services and startups is proof of this. Pakistan, with its current challenges, could also benefit enormously by tapping into global markets and harnessing technology to leapfrog some of its limitations. These lessons aren't just about the destinies of two nations. They are universal principles for any leader or entrepreneur looking to build something that lasts. Consistent policies, investing in human potential, diversifying resources, and embracing change. These are the pillars of sustainable success. The story of India and Pakistan isn't just about two countries. It's a case study in economics, governance, and human development. It tells us that success isn't just about what you have, but how you use it. If you found this video enlightening, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share it with friends. Comment below on what you think the future holds for India and Pakistan's economies. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.